Wonderful. Thank you and welcome, everyone. As Chrissy mentioned, my name is Danielle Parisi Rafato, and I happen to be an attorney who works for an agency that provides services for survivors of domestic violence, as well as a member of the Dove Ministry at SRB. I'm going to, let's see, try to share my screen. And, oh no.
What do you need me to
I
do?
might be having an issue, Chrissy. It looks like it's not. You want?
I'll share it. You can just tell me when to switch slides.
Perfect. Sorry.
That's okay.
Okay. Wonderful. All right. And so thank you. So today's micro workshop is on the topic of safety planning. And we are having a couple of these this October in celebration of Domestic Violence Awareness Month. I am at an agency called Ascend Justice. And if you, Chrissy, if you could switch the slide. All right. What we are is a legal aid organization, and we aim to empower individuals and families who are impacted by gender-based violence or the child welfare system. And we work through holistic legal advocacy and also towards systemic reform. So what does all that mean? It means that we provide legal services in a few important areas. And most of our focus is on survivors of domestic violence, but some of it is also on families involved in the child welfare system. And we provide services for people seeking orders of protection. We provide family law services, immigration help, family defense, that's our child welfare program. And then economic justice is a group of remedies that are available to people who have experienced domestic violence in Illinois. And on top of providing those direct services, we do have client support coordinators at each of our offices who work with our clients to do things like what I'm going to talk about tonight, safety planning and linking them with resources and helping them kind of emotionally through the process. And we also do advocacy and have a few unique programs. I've been at Ascend Justice, which used to be known as the Domestic Violence Legal Clinic, for a little over 13 years. And so in that time, I have been an attorney in orders of protection and family law, and also run our pro bono programs. And now I'm the director of emergency services, which is our order of protection services. Next slide. Thank you. So I'm here today to talk about safety planning. And I think a good place to start is, what is that? That's what brings us here tonight. But what does it actually mean? So can I have the next slide? And there's a unicorn. And the reason I show the unicorn is a colleague of mine did an advanced safety planning training for our staff a few years ago. And one of her slides was a picture of a unicorn. And the reason is, in the domestic violence community, we often talk about safety planning like it's some mysterious thing, but it's not. It's not a unicorn. It's nothing mysterious. It's not some mythical being. My best definition of it is, it's a practical way to help someone plan to increase their safety. And it includes things that we might do when having a conversation with someone without even thinking about them. But there are some important points that you can cover during those conversations. And there are some key bits of advice that we often give. Next slide. Okay, so I think it's important to talk about not only what it is, but why it is important. And one thing is that safety planning is a tool. And I like to think of the things that my agency does and other organizations do in support of our clients as being various tools in a toolbox. Safety planning is one of many options. So some other tools that we might use might include the court system. And I mentioned protective orders, or perhaps a criminal case if that's necessary. Also, other domestic violence providers who provide shelter and counseling and support might be part of our toolbox. And there are also other strategies. So I want to be clear that this isn't the only thing, but it is one thing that we can try when we're working with survivors to increase their safety. So it gives us one additional tool. And another thing is that safety planning is very flexible. It's very customizable. You can talk with someone, two people who are in two totally different set of circumstances, and safety plan with both of them. And you can discuss options, you can work out solutions, and you can focus on different things. I want to point out that you can safety plan in a relationship when someone is about to leave an abusive relationship, and years beyond that. So it really is, it really can fit pretty much any situation. But then the last thing, and this is really important, is that it allows the survivor to prepare for their next steps. And I would say, generally in life, we're encouraged to prepare. We're encouraged to have an emergency fund and, prepare our family. What if this happens? Bring a first aid kit, things like that. Well, when someone is in a situation where they are experiencing domestic violence, this allows them to take some control back of what's going to happen and plan for their next steps, regardless of where they are at in this relationship. So it can be very empowering, as well as something practically that can help. So if you would go to the next slide. All right, so now we get to how we do safety planning. So where do we get started? Well, there are a variety of tools available online, and different organizations have different ways of setting this up. In some cases, you will look for a safety plan and you will see a whole list of suggestions. Do this, do this, do this. In other cases, you may see sort of a fill in the blank. I can do this. A person I can call is blank. One thing I can do to protect myself is blank. So the person is thinking through it on a more personal basis. The other thing is that we tend to focus on specific areas, and I've just listed a few here just to give you sort of a feel for what this can look like. I also just want to talk about when this would come up. So, most often we safety plan when someone comes into our office and the legal remedies that we have available aren't going to solve their issue, or they're not going to solve them completely. And someone is really concerned about what's going to happen next. And so we're normally somewhat directed towards the area that we need to go into because someone is concerned about their technology, and their devices being compromised, or somebody's concerned because they work with their abuser and they're looking for solutions. But this is more of a broad approach, what I've laid out here. So some examples are during an incident of abuse. And I mentioned that you can safety plan with somebody who is still in an abusive relationship, who may have no plans to leave right then and there. But there are certain things that they can do to prepare for. So, for example, there are certain rooms in a home that are generally considered safer. If someone thinks that things are rising to the level where an argument may become abusive, we advise stay away from the kitchen. There's a lot of sharp things in the kitchen. Stay away from the bathroom. There's a lot of really hard surfaces and dangerous areas in the bathroom. Don't get yourself trapped. Try to stay in a main open area near the door. That's some sort of positioning safety planning. Think about what they can do or say to de-escalate the situation. Is there someone else that they can ask to help? So is there a friend that they can text to say, hey, in a certain code word, and that means things are escalating, you need to call the police? Is there a neighbor where if they say, if you hear me knock 3 times, that's when things have escalated enough? So sort of who can you bring into your circle to help if things start to escalate? There's a bunch of things that can be kind of figured out when someone is planning to leave the relationship. And it definitely is helpful if we are talking about a plan, which this can't always be the case, but where somebody is making kind of plans on where to go next, what to do. So things like where to physically go, who to call, what numbers do you need to have, what family members or friends might you be able to stay with, or where else might you be able to go? What to bring with you is a huge one. And this is not an extensive list that I've put here, but things like birth certificates for your children, you need those for everything, for school, for doctors, immigration documents, insurance or medical cards, any court orders like a protective order or custody order, numbers for your doctors, things that you wouldn't think about needing, as well as things like if you have children, maybe a favorite stuffed animal or some sort of familiar toy in case you need to leave. And also where you would store those things. Is there someone, a family member or friend, who you can leave a bag with just the most important documents? So if you do need to leave, you don't have to go back into the home to try to search for those. There's technology safety, which is a whole other, I mean, I put one bullet point, there's a million things, but we're talking about the security of devices and also accounts, which I forgot to mention, but it's important. So has someone put any apps or programs on your computer or your phone that allow them to track you, as well as have they used that to gain access to things as important as bank accounts or email addresses, as well as social media accounts? There's a million ways. So both of those things. Technology can also be used to track someone. I mentioned apps, and those are used sometimes, but we've also had clients in the past who physically had a GPS device found on their car. So ways to think about tracking beyond just your phone. And then a final example is keeping kids safe and kids who are involved in the relationship. How do we either keep them out of things, or what do you tell them, and what and that's going to depend a lot on their age and maturity level. You're going to have a different conversation with a 16-year-old than you are with a 5-year-old. But even very young kids, do they know how to call the police? And do they know that if, and without even talking about the relationship, if someone's in danger, do they know that that's something that they can do? So that is a laundry list, but hopefully it gives you an impression of what types of things we talk about when we do safety planning. To go back to what we just talked about a minute ago, why this is important. Um, there are, you never know when this issue is going to come up. And for us at SRB, as well as others from other DV ministries, you never know when you're going to get a call where someone's going to approach you after mass, when someone's going to hear that you're involved in this group and say, oh, my sister's having this issue. What do I say? What do I do? And well, there are, and I'm going to give you the number next for the domestic violence helpline. And there are a lot of great resources. We're still limited. And even pre-COVID, we definitely did not have enough shelter beds to always meet the need. Sometimes there's a waiting list to get into counseling. Sometimes we have a waiting list, or we have to close our intakes to provide legal services. And so it's sometimes you need to talk about other options, or you're talking with someone, but maybe they're not ready to do that. Maybe they're not ready to leave their abuser. Maybe they don't feel comfortable going to a support group or counseling, and they're just reaching out as their first step. So we always want to be prepared to kind of to be available and help someone think through what they can do to keep themselves safe. We've also talked a lot in our SRB group about what we provide as a ministry. And I didn't put this as part of the safety planning, but as part of sort of emotional well-being and support, we can always pray with and for individuals who seek out our assistance. And we can always provide that type of comfort and support and that link, which can be hugely helpful and really important. So I don't want to, skip over that part of things, because that's obviously why we're all here. Can we go to the next slide, Chrissy? Okay, so there's a really important resource which we give out all the time under every circumstance imaginable, which is the Illinois Domestic Violence Helpline. It's free 24 hours. It's a confidential hotline. And some things that are great about the DV Helpline, they can provide links to resources. So if someone calls and they need, for example, a shelter, they have up to date information about which shelters have beds and how many they have. If someone needs counseling or legal aid or other services, they can refer from there. They can also do safety planning over the phone. One thing that they do that is really helpful is if somebody calls the police and they're not successful in making a police report, they can call the police on three-way and ensure that a report is taken as required by Illinois law, so they can sort of be on the phone during that process. They have access to the language line, which means they have translators for every language imaginable, and we use the language line. So they really are a great resource. And then also I put a few links to a few organizations that have safety planning information on their website. This is meant to be a mini training, but as I mentioned, there are sites that have way more extensive lists of questions to ask or things to consider or fill in the blanks. That are things that that might guide you if you're looking for more information. I couldn't find one that was good to share that was easy to show. They tend to be at least a few pages long because you're trying to cover all of your bases, and especially the ones that involve fill in the blanks, you want to make sure that there's obviously space. So next slide. finally, I just leave you with my information, and I'm happy to answer questions or if anyone has issues they want to bring up and discuss. I'm also available. We are largely remote, but you can still reach me at this phone number and at this email address, as we, as an agency and community, continue to respond to COVID-19. So with that,
So I wonder, Danielle, should I stop the share screen? So
I think so, unless anyone has any reason, I can distribute this as well if it would be helpful.
okay, I'm going to stop share so that way we
Yeah.
can people can ask questions, and you could feel free to write a question in the chat as well if you don't
Mhm.
want to be on the recording. So that way I can
Right.
bring that up. First of all, I would like to say thank you, Danielle, for taking the time to put that together for us. And that was
Okay.
very helpful and informative. If anyone has a question that you'd like to ask, feel free to either unmute yourself and ask it, or type it in the chat box, or raise your hand so I can unmute you. I think
Well,
you.
I have so one thing is important to recognize is your agency, Ascend Justice. Um, it operates primarily out of the 555 West Harrison Domestic Violence Court. Isn't that correct?
Yes, so we have two divisions now, and so the program that I run is out of that's emergency service, and that's at 555 West Harrison, and then we have a second. We expanded, so we have a second office on State Street.
On State Street. Okay, that's
Mhm.
great. And so does Lindsay Hawley still work with you?
Yes, yes. Lindsay
Oh.
is a good friend of mine, and we've been worked together for several 6 years longer.
Well, Lindsay is a member of St. Viator's Parish.
Hmm.
And so I got to meet her when I went to St. Viator's and
Oh, great.
preached there and everything. And she was wanting to get that committee together. I don't know that she
Hmm.
had luck really pulling it all together.
Yeah.
But I did enjoy meeting her, and I hope
Yeah.
that you should ask her tomorrow if you see her.
I'll definitely, yeah.
Yeah, tell her Father Chuck was wondering
I will.
how you doing at St. Viator's. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, very good.
Thank you.
Other thoughts or questions?
One of the things that I find is safety planning is so important for certain people, but actually, my experience is the vast majority in the Hispanic community, anyway, where I'm located and where I work primarily. Actually, the safety is not primarily the issue, but it's important and it's something we have to know about. But the emotional abuse and occasional physical abuse is also it's there, but it's not like they're threatened with. Although I have yesterday we had a mass at the cathedral survivors of domestic violence at 10 o'clock, and you can actually go to Holy Name Cathedral and their website, and you can click on the mass and see the mass. And the interesting thing about the mass was, within my homily, I had a survivor speak, and she spoke about she should have had a safety plan because really brutalized in the end before she freed herself. And she didn't know anything about domestic violence. She didn't know about safety plan. She didn't even think that she won. She spent 5 days in a coma and a month in the hospital. And even today, years later, she still has physical and psychological consequences of that abuse. So um, it would have been good for her to know about safety planning and how to get out of a threatening situation.
Yeah. And one of the comments in the chat box too, I just want to mention this too, is that yes, the emotional abuse is often very confusing as well, so um, the ability to do safety planning around that emotional abuse is something that we've talked about too.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah, and we've talked about. I think that brings up a good point, Father Dom and Dee Dee, is that um, abuse is different for each person. It impacts everyone differently, and one thing about emotional abuse is that it can be, yeah, so confusing. It can cause survivors to believe that they're not actually being abused, that they're the ones who are abusive, and that feeds the cycle, and that can make it extra hard to even recognize what is really going on. So sometimes tonight we were focusing on safety planning, but sometimes as ministry members, it's just being someone who listens and is sort of a sounding board, and can have a conversation and maybe help someone realize that they are in an abusive relationship. That is what is being told to them isn't correct. That the person who is doing this to them isn't showing them love.
right. And we will do some of that too in our thing next week as well. Our next Monday night workshop is on the spiritual resilience and stuff for that side of it too.
I had a question for Danielle, is if in a situation in your parish, someone makes a disclosure,
Mhm.
and how, I think it's important to understand safety planning, but for those of us who are not professionally trained,
Yeah.
deal with a survivor and want to do no harm, which I think
Right.
is really important. Like how to understand what would be our appropriate boundaries in listening, affirming them, and supporting them for a safety plan, but not trying to
Yeah.
move into the role of a counselor. I mean, where you'd create
Right.
a dependency. So I guess I'm asking from my standpoint, if you have that, someone has the courage and the confidence to
Right.
disclose to you, and that's huge. Just
Yeah.
just affirming that and listening and saying you believe the person and you
Yeah.
thank them, and you say they don't deserve it. Okay, but then if to go into a discussion of some kind about
Yeah.
a safety plan, how would I as a
Yeah.
non-professional navigate that conversation?
Yeah, so I have a few ideas. One thing is that there are resources. There are obviously counselors and advocates and the helpline, and so there are these resources to fall back on. And of course, if you have the option to connect somebody or get them connected with services on a more ongoing basis, that's great.
Mhm.
But you might find yourself in this conversation and sort of be like, where do I go, what do I do? So I think a few things. One thing that we focus on a lot, I would say in the whole community, but I know at Ascend Justice we talk a lot about all of our clients, making their own decisions and trying to make sure that we're supporting them in their decisions, knowing that they're not ours to make, right? And so I think that is a huge part because, you can ask someone, would you like to talk more about this? Do you want to talk about what you might want to do next? Kind of let them tell you where they're at.
Mhm.
And it might just be, I want you to just listen to me. The other thing is, I think it's always good to set up some next steps. So something like, okay, well, do you want to, I mentioned like a code word. Do you want to, or do you want to text me if you ever really need something? You know, you can do that. Or do you want to set up a time to talk maybe in 2 weeks, just so we can check in? Or let's set up a time to have coffee once a month or something like that, so that you can put yourself in a position where they can reach out to you if needed. And the things that I'm thinking of are things that wouldn't raise an abuser's suspicions so much. So having a little code word like, oh, hey, you know, have you been to that restaurant? And a specific restaurant would mean I really need to talk to someone, right? Or, and that doesn't look suspicious if someone else reads those messages. Or just, oh, my friend so-and-so, we decided we're going to go out for monthly coffee. We're going to go out once a month on Tuesdays. We're missed, you know, don't have a lot of time to catch up. Something that would make it more like a regular thing. So I think that it's important to leave that like kind of door open for what happens next, and possibly to talk about that. And I do think it's important to try to get some resources to that person as soon as you can. Even if it is the hotline, even if it is a counselor to talk about a variety of issues. But I also think that you can do a little bit in terms of asking them what they want to talk about. You might have somebody who just breaks down, I don't know what to do, I can't leave. And so how do you handle that? And so then I would respond by, okay, well, so that's, you know, your feelings are absolutely understandable. Let's talk a little bit about that. So what do you think you might be able to do? And maybe you could talk someone through thinking up some of their own stops.
Thanks, that's helpful.
I would just like to comment. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Oh, okay. I would just like to make this comment. Everything we talked about tonight is just great. And thank you, St. Robert Bellarmine Group, for all the work your Dove Ministry is doing. So it just, for me, it's most important that you get your ministry out there and visible. Because if people know that you're there, they may come and talk to you about what's going on. So keep it out there. Keep putting advertisements out there. Keep doing things that they can't miss, that there's something going on in St. Robert's that will help victims. Thank you so much for what you're doing.
Thanks, Pat. One of the other comments that came in the chat was keywords are an important part of safety planning. Saying something as simple as there's a good sale at Joann's. If someone knows that's what you're talking about, they know. I remember, you know, as a kid, my mom was always afraid that when I babysat somewhere, there was something. So she said, if you ever call me and tell me the dog threw up, I'm sending the police. So that was our keyword, right? Like, and that wasn't domestic violence. That was just the keyword for me being out there babysitting for people. So yeah, those kinds of keywords are critical.
Yeah.
So
I'd like to pursue that question that Jan had. I think, you know, some victims are not going to want to look for help. Like they're not going to call the hotline. Well, I don't need that. I don't need this, and so forth. So I think that the tips about offering yourself to be accessible is great. You know, I'll meet with you monthly or however, or here's a code word, give me a call, send me a text. Those are all real good. But I'd like to ask, what if you were to say something like, well, are you, do you feel fearful or are you threatened? So if you ask that question, then you're starting to kind of ask the person a little bit more about what's going on. And it seems to me that if they say yes, I mean, if they say no, they say no, and it's over with, right? But if they say yes, then you're into a discussion like, well, gee, I'm really sorry about that. I don't want you to feel that way. You know, that it kind of means you really do need some help, you know, or maybe you need to make sure that you have a safety plan. So I don't know, is it inappropriate for some person who is not a counselor to go that far?
I think it's fine. That's my opinion.
Yeah, no, I think it's fine. I think, you know, imagining this conversation where somebody is telling you things I mean, I think, asking, well, do you feel safe? Do you feel like you need a place to go now? Where do you, kind of in terms of trying to figure out where they're at. And yeah.
Well, and I think for
Okay.
those of us that are mandated reporters, you also have to ask, is there any risk to the children in your home? Right? Like that, if you're a mandated reporter, you have to ask that question. And you have to be willing to report it anonymously for that person. But that is something that you have to, when someone expresses something about violence in their home, you do have to ask about the children.
That's right.
So, well, I would like to say thank you to everyone. And we normally in our parish pray together at 8 o'clock, and we've missed the time a little bit, but this whole entire evening has been one of prayer as we hold each other in prayer. So I'm going to put on the shared screen our prayer, and I'm going to ask the Dove members from SRB to do the stanzas. So John and Kathy, would you do the first stanza, Veronica the second, Kathleen the third, and Danielle the fourth? And then that's how we found this prayer works best together.
Great, wonderful.
So if everyone can, whoops, I don't want to do that. Just want to make sure you can all see that. Does that work? Can you see it?
Yes.
Okay. So everyone take a deep breath and bring yourself into the presence of God in this shared space in cyberspace, but also that we are together. And we put our hearts and our minds at rest in God. So Kathy and John, you can begin. Whoops. I don't know if we can hear you, Kathy and John. Sorry. Make sure to unmute yourself. The rest of our SRB team members, unmute yourself. There we go. Perfect.
You hear us now?
Yes,
Okay.
we
We'll start again.
can.
Loving God, you create in your people hearts filled with love, peace, and mercy. Remind each person impacted by domestic violence that they are your beloved child and they deserve dignity and peace. Call us to remember your love and mercy for each of your beloved children.
Gentle Shepherd, Jesus, you have shown your people how to live lives of courage, compassion, and justice. Grant each person impacted by domestic violence the courage to do what is right and just. Strengthen their hearts of fear with your courage and hope, and transform angry hearts of stone into ones capable of your love and compassion.
Spirit of wisdom, you companion each of us daily and promise to be an advocate of truth and wholeness. Encourage each person impacted by domestic violence to seek hope and healing. We know you remain with us in our loneliness and fear. Heal the brokenness of our world and guide us to abide in your love so that all might have the ability to participate in the good news.
We humbly ask all of these things as a community of believers who trust in your love. May all of those impacted by domestic violence be comforted by our communion of prayers for hope and healing, so that one day we might all together be an example of your peace, mercy, companionship, and love in the world. Amen.
Amen.
So thank you, everyone, and God bless you all. Thank you for joining us
Thank you,
today.
everyone.
I'm going to
Thank
leave
you.
the Zoom on for a little bit if people want to continue chatting, but those of you that need to go, feel free to go.
Run,
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
little ones.
Yeah.
Bye, John and Kathy.
Bye.
Bye.